Poor mother walks for hours with her daughter in her arms to avoid spending money on food, until a billionaire stops his car and changes everything. The sun showed no mercy to anyone walking that summer afternoon. Clara adjusted the strap of her worn shoulder bag on her right shoulder while balancing Isla, her 4-year-old daughter, on her left hip. The girl's golden curls bounced against her neck with every step, and the scent of cheap children's shampoo, the one that was on sale at the corner store, mingled with the sweat running down both their foreheads. There were exactly 1.5 miles between the makeshift workshop where Clara sewed and the small one-bedroom apartment they called home. 1.5 miles that on normal days, Clara walked alone. But today was Thursday, the day to pick up Isla from the community daycare on the way, and the girl's little arms and legs had already given up walking after the first 300 yards. "Are you heavy, sweetie?" Clara whispered, adjusting the child on her hip while stepping around a pothole in the asphalt. In truth, it was a needless question. Clara knew exactly how much each of her daughter's 37 pounds weighed. She knew the weight not just in her arms, but mostly in her back, that ached after 10 hours hunched over the sewing machine. Isla didn't answer immediately. Her big brown eyes watched with fascination a dog pulling a man in a hat on the other side of the street. Only after a few seconds, as if she had just processed the question, did the girl turn to her mother. "Mommy, aren't you tired?" The question, innocent as only a child's could be, hit Clara like a punch to the stomach. It was obvious she was exhausted. The deep circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights, sewing to finish orders that paid less than they should. Her overly thin body revealed the skipped meals so that Isla could eat better, but how could she explain that to a 4-year-old? "I am, but it's worth it for our dinner," Clara replied with a fragile smile, trying to mask the tremor in her voice. Isla nodded seriously, as if she profoundly understood the family economy, and rested her head on her mother's shoulder. The simple gesture brought a pang to Clara's heart. Her daughter was growing up too fast, learning about sacrifices too soon. The traffic light ahead turned red, and Clara stopped, taking the opportunity to switch Isla's position. Her bag was heavy with the fabric and thread she had bought with the down payment for her next order, a party dress for a regular client's daughter. The bus fare cost $2.50 each way. A round trip for both of them would be 10 $10. With that money, Clara could buy rice, beans, and even a little ground beef for dinner. Choices. Clara's life was made up of them, and they were rarely easy choices. "Mommy, look at that car, it looks like a prince's." Isla pointed to a black sedan that slowed down near them. Clara instinctively tightened her grip on her daughter and took a step back. In the big city, unknown cars rarely meant anything good for a single woman with a child on her hip. The car window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in a dark suit, a slightly loosened navy blue tie and thin-rimmed glasses. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with precisely cut dark hair and a 5 o'clock shadow that suggested long working hours. "Excuse me." His voice was deep, yet gentle. "Do you need a ride? It's too hot to walk, especially with a child." Clara felt her body stiffen. Her fingers tightened around Isla's leg as her mind quickly processed her options. Her instinct screamed danger, but her feet ached and sweat soaked her blouse. "No, thank you," she replied dryly, pulling Isla closer. The man seemed genuinely concerned. He turned off the car engine and adjusted his glasses. "I apologize. I didn't mean to alarm you. My name is Julian Carter. I'm an attorney heading back from the courthouse." He held out a business card through the window. Clara didn't take it. "Look, I understand your hesitation, hard times. But it really costs me nothing to drop you off where you need to go." Clara was about to refuse again when Isla, with the innocence and inexplicable intuition of children, pointed at the man and said, loud enough for him to hear, "He has a calm smile, Mommy." Clara looked at Julian again. Indeed, there was something about his smile that didn't seem threatening, a tired kindness, perhaps. She looked around. The street was busy. It was still daylight, and they really needed to get home. "Where are you headed?" Julian asked, without pressuring her. "Maplewood Gardens," Clara replied, mentioning the modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. "I can drop you off there without a problem. I'm heading downtown. It's on my way. After a few more seconds of hesitation, Clara finally nodded. "All right, thank you." Julian got out of the car and opened the back door for them. Clara got in first, settling Isla on her lap and placing her bag beside her. The car interior was immaculately clean, smelling of new leather and a slight aroma of coffee. "Seatbelt, please," Julian gently reminded, returning to his spot in the driver's seat. Clara obeyed, adjusting the belt around herself and Isla. The air conditioning was like a balm after the heat of the street. Isla let out a sigh of relief that almost made Clara smile. Almost. "Did you come from far?" Julian asked, carefully maneuvering the car back into traffic. "From downtown," Clara replied, keeping her voice neutral. "I work in a sewing shop near City Hall." "Seamstress? Interesting. Do you work for a specific brand?" "I do a bit of everything. Alterations, repairs, some custom-made pieces." Julian nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "And the little girl, what's her name?" Before Clara could answer, Isla spoke up. "I'm Isla. I'm 4 years old." She held up 4 little fingers to emphasize her age. "And Mommy makes princess dresses." Julian smiled through the rearview mirror. "Princess dresses. Wow, your mother must be very talented." Clara felt her face warm. "They're just party dresses, nothing major. Mommy made a blue dress with little stars for Mrs. Thompson's daughter. It looked like Elsa's." The pride in her daughter's voice softened Clara's defensive posture a bit. She stroked Isla's hair, noting how relaxed the girl seemed, almost sleepy with the gentle rocking of the car and the cool air. Julian observed the interaction through the rearview mirror, and his expression subtly changed. There was something about Clara's calloused hands, the way her simple, faded blouse contrasted with the evident care she took in combing her daughter's hair. Small details that told a bigger story. The car stopped at another traffic light, and Julian noticed Isla clutching her stomach. A noise, almost imperceptible, escaped the girl, the unmistakable sound of an empty stomach. "Have you had lunch yet?" he asked cautiously. Clara tensed again. "We are heading home now." Julian glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past 3 in the afternoon. "There's a simple diner nearby. They serve reasonably priced boxed lunches. I'm hungry, and it would be a pleasure to invite you, if it's not too much trouble." "We don't need your charity," Clara replied automatically, the words coming out harsher than she intended. Julian seemed surprised. "It's not charity, it's gratitude for keeping me company in traffic. I've been driving alone too much lately." Clara was about to refuse again when Isla's stomach rumbled louder, and the girl looked at her with those huge eyes, gleaming with hope. "I'm hungry, Mommy," she whispered, as if it were a secret between the two of them. It was that whisper that melted Clara's last defenses, not for herself, but for Isla. Her daughter had eaten only toast with butter and a banana for breakfast, and the daycare snack was not substantial. "All right," she finally conceded. "But just for today." The relief on Isla's face was worth every ounce of pride she swallowed. Julian smiled and changed direction, turning onto a side street. "It's nearby. Home-style food. Nothing fancy, but very good." The restaurant was exactly as he described, simple, clean, with wooden tables and a counter where one could choose from 5 or 6 meal options. The smell of home cooking made Clara's stomach protest, reminding her that she herself hadn't eaten since the morning of the previous day. They sat at a table near the window. Isla, suddenly shy, partially hid behind her mother's arm as she observed the place with curious eyes. "You can choose whatever you like," Julian said, as he examined the handwritten menu on a blackboard on the wall. Clara hesitated, looking at the prices. Even for a simple place, it was more than she could afford. What do you like to eat, Isla?" Julian asked the girl directly. Ayla looked at her mother as if asking for permission to answer. Clara nodded slightly. "Pasta with red sauce?" Ayla replied, still shyly. "And orange juice." Julian smiled. "Excellent choice. I think I'll order the same. And you, Clara?" The sound of her name in his voice caught her by surprise. She didn't remember introducing herself. "Your daughter mentioned your name when we talked about the dresses," Julian explained, as if reading her thoughts. Sorry for the familiarity. It's fine, Clara replied, relaxing a little. I think I'll have the chicken and vegetables. Julian placed the order, and soon the table was covered with steaming plates. Theidler's eyes widened at the sight of the pasta covered in sauce and grated cheese. Clara felt a lump in her throat, realizing how something so simple seemed like a feast to her daughter. During the meal, Julian kept the conversation light, talking about the restaurant, the neighborhood, carefully avoiding overly personal questions. It was Isla who, between bites, began to open small windows into their lives. Mommy makes my clothes, and hers too. But mine are prettier because they have little flowers, Julian smiled. You must be quite the seamstress, Clara. Clara shrugged, but there was a slight flush of pride on her cheeks. I learned from my grandmother. She sewed for the whole family. Have you lived here long? 2 years. Since... She stopped, uncertain if she should continue. Since Daddy became a star in the sky, Isla completed, with the cruel simplicity of children. The silence that followed was heavy. Julian lowered his eyes to his plate. I'm sorry, he finally said. Clara took a deep breath. It was a construction accident. Ricardo worked as a bricklayer. Didn't you have insurance, or, forgive me for asking, but was there any compensation? Julian's professional side involuntarily emerged, and Clara realized that it wasn't just curiosity, but the lawyer in him thinking about the practical issues. The company closed soon after. I barely managed to receive the basic rights, and that was with a lot of effort. She paused. And since then, it's just the two of us. Isla, oblivious to the seriousness of the conversation, was delightedly sipping her orange juice, leaving a little orange mustache above her upper lip. For it must be difficult, Julian commented, with no pity in his voice, merely stating a fact. It's the life we have, Clara replied simply. I do what I can with what I have. Something in that response, in the dignity with which Clara spoke of her daily struggle, touched Julian in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't pity. He was well acquainted with that feeling in his profession. It was admiration. You know, he began, choosing his words carefully, I just moved offices. Everything is out of place. If you're willing to help me organize, I can pay you well. Clara looked at him with suspicion. Why? There are plenty of people looking for that kind of work. Julian held her gaze. Because you strike me as someone who does things carefully, and because... He hesitated. Because I'm tired of having only formal voices around me. An office needs life. Clara continued to watch him, trying to decipher his true intentions. Isla had finished her pasta and was now drawing imaginary figures on the table with her finger. If it's real work, Clara finally replied. I accept. Julian smiled, but there was no condescension in his gaze. It is real work. You can bring Isla if you need to. I have an empty room that can serve as an office for her too. For the first time since getting into the car, Clara allowed herself a small smile, no more than a slight curving of her lips, but enough to completely transform her face. Tomorrow then, Julian asked, taking a card from his pocket and writing an address on the back. This is the new location. Can you come in the morning? Clara took the card, studying it for a moment before putting it in her bag. We'll be there at 8. When they finished their meal and returned to the car, the sun was beginning to set. Isla, with a full stomach and the rocking of the car, fell asleep almost immediately in Clara's lap. The silence between the adults was no longer tense, but comfortable, as if a tacit agreement had been established. Upon arriving at the address, Clara indicated a small apartment building on the outskirts. Julian gently stopped the car so as not to wake Isla. Thank you, Clara said, with a sincerity that surprised them both. For the ride, for the food, and for the opportunity. Julian nodded. See you tomorrow, Clara. As he watched mother and daughter disappear into the simple building entrance, Clara carrying a sleeping Isla with that silent strength he was beginning to admire, Julian realized that, for the first time in a long time, he was genuinely looking forward to the next day. It wasn't just a job he had offered. It was a bridge, and perhaps, though neither of them could imagine it at that moment, It was the first step on a journey much bigger than a simple walk home. The red brick building on the corner of Elm Street didn't stand out among the other offices in the area. That Monday morning, when Clara arrived with Isla by the hand, it was still 15 minutes before 8 o'clock. The cool morning air made Isla's golden curls bounce as she skipped beside her mother. Clara had woken up earlier than usual, carefully chosen the best of her blouses, a simple navy blue one with few signs of wear, and brushed Isla's hair with more care than normal. The girl carried a yellow backpack almost as big as herself. "Is it here, Mommy?" Isla asked, looking up at the building with that curious gaze only children have. Clara checked the card with the address Julian had written down one more time. "Yes, it's here." She took a deep breath and pushed open the glass door. The lobby was small, but clean. An elderly doorman with white hair and a neatly trimmed mustache looked up from his newspaper when they entered. "Good morning," Clara greeted. "We are looking for Dr. Julian Carter's office." The man smiled. "Third floor, suite 302. He pointed to the elevator. "But I don't think he's arrived yet. He usually comes in after 9. "He asked us to come at 8, Clara replied, feeling a pang of uncertainty. "Ah, then he must be waiting," the doorman shrugged. "The elevator's working fine today." Clara thanked him and led Isla to the elevator. Inside the cabin, the girl giggled as she saw her distorted reflection in the polished metal doors. Clara took the opportunity to check her own appearance, adjusting stray hairs that had escaped her simple bun. On the 3rd floor, the hallway was silent. The middle door had a small temporary sign, "Julian Carter, Attorney at Law." Clara hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door opened almost immediately, as if Julian had been waiting behind it. He was wearing dress pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His hair was still damp, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the office. "Punctual," he smiled. "Good morning, Clara." Then, bending down slightly, he smiled at Isla. "And good morning to you too, Miss Isla." The girl hid partially behind her mother's leg, sudden shyness overcoming her. "Good morning," Clara replied formally. "I hope we aren't too early." "Not at all. Come in, please." Julian stepped aside, allowing them to pass. The office interior was an organized chaos. The main room was filled with stacked cardboard boxes, empty bookshelves leaning against the walls, and documents in folders scattered across a large table in the center. "As you can see," Julian gestured to the chaos around him, "I wasn't exaggerating when I said I needed help with the organization." The morning light streamed through the wide windows, revealing dust particles dancing in the air. It was a large space, with the potential to be welcoming, but at the moment it looked more like a storage unit. "I haven't opened to the public yet," Julian explained, as he led them through the room. "We'll organize first, just us here." He showed them a small attached kitchen, where a coffee maker was diligently working, and a corridor that led to 2 other rooms. "That will be my private office, for confidential meetings." He pointed to the door on the right. "And this," he opened the door on the left, revealing a smaller but equally bright room. "I thought could be a workspace for you, Clara. And there's room for Isla too, if you like." The room was empty, except for a simple desk and 2 chairs. It was clean, with a window that overlooked a small internal courtyard. Clara felt something strange in her stomach, perhaps gratitude, perhaps apprehension. "I like the window," Isla suddenly commented, approaching the glass to observe some birds that had landed on the sill. Julian smiled. "I do too. The afternoon sun comes through it." He turned to Clara. "If you prefer to stay in the main room, that's fine. I just thought you might like a quieter space." "This is perfect," Clara replied, trying not to show how touched she was by the thoughtfulness. "Can we start?" "Of course," Julian nodded. "I'll show you where the files are and how I'd like them organized. I have to be at the courthouse at 10, but I'll explain everything before I leave." Over the next 2 hours, Julian patiently explained his filing system. It was simple, but efficient. Cases organized by type, then chronologically. He showed her where the office supplies were, taught Clara how to use the landline phone in case someone called, and confirmed that the internet was working in case they needed to look something up. "These pencils and papers are for you, Isla," he said, handing the girl a small box with drawing supplies. "While your mum works, you can be the official office artist." Isla's eyes sparkled. She took the box with careful reverence, as if it were a treasure. "Can I draw anything I want?" "Absolutely anything," Julian confirmed seriously. "In fact, it would be an honor to have your artwork decorating this place." Clara watched the interaction with a mixture of gratitude and caution. Julian's kindness to Isla seemed genuine, but years of struggle had taught Clara to always expect life to exact a price for good things. "I have to go now," Julian announced, looking at his watch. He put on his jacket and adjusted his tie. "I'll be back after lunch. There's a restaurant on the corner that delivers. The menu is in the desk drawer. Order whatever you like. It's all set up with them." Clara started to protest, but Julian was already at the door. "My cell phone number is written next to the phone. If you have any questions, just call." He smiled one last time. "Thank you for being here." And then he left, leaving mother and daughter alone amidst the organized chaos of papers and boxes. For a few moments, the silence felt oppressive. Clara looked around, feeling the weight of the responsibility. Julian had entrusted his office, his documents, to a near stranger. "So, Mummy," Isla's voice broke her thoughts, "can I draw here?" She pointed to a corner of the main room, where the sun formed a perfect square on the floor. "You can, sweetie. But be careful not to make a mess, and don't touch any papers, okay?" Isla nodded solemnly and settled into her sunny corner, spreading out the colored pencils and immediately beginning to trace shapes on the white paper. Clara took a deep breath and started working. She always had a natural instinct for organization, an ability to find order in chaos. She began by separating the boxes by content, then organizing the documents into piles by case type. Time passed without either of them noticing. Clara's hands worked with the same precision with which she sewed, treating each paper carefully as if it were a delicate piece of fabric. Occasionally, she stopped to check on Isla, who remained absorbed in her world of colors and shapes. Around 11:30, the phone rang, startling both of them. Clara hesitated before answering, uncertain how to introduce herself. "Dr. Julian Carter's office," she finally said, her voice slightly shaky. "Clara?" "It's Julian." His voice sounded distant, with the typical noise of a courthouse hallway in the background. "Is everything all right there?" "Yes, no problems," she replied, feeling strangely relieved to hear his voice. "I've already sorted most of the administrative files." "Perfect. I won't be able to make it back for lunch as planned." The judge extended the session. "Have you ordered food?" "Not yet. Please do. Number 5 on the menu is very good. I'll be back as soon as I can." Before Clara could protest, Julian had hung up. She stared at the phone for a few seconds, a strange feeling growing inside her. It wasn't exactly distrust, but something close to disbelief. People like Julian Carter, who simply gave without demanding anything in return, didn't exist in her world. "Who was it, Mommy?" Isla asked, raising her eyes from her drawing, something that looked like a house with many colorful windows. "It was Mr. Carter. He said he'll be a little late." "He's nice," Isla declared with the absolute confidence that only children possess. "He looks like someone who tells good stories." Clara didn't answer. Instead, she opened the drawer and found the mentioned menu. After a few minutes of deliberation, she ordered the infamous number 5, a dish of chicken with vegetables and rice, to share with Isla. When the food arrived, they took a short break. They sat on the floor, using one of the empty boxes as a makeshift table. The chicken was tender, the vegetables well seasoned. Isla ate heartily, telling her between bites about the drawings she was making. "This is the office," she explained, showing one of the papers, "and here's you putting away the papers, and this is Uncle Jules at the courthouse, arguing with the judge." Clara nearly choked on her juice. "Isla, he doesn't argue with the judge. He defends people." Isla shrugged as if it were the same thing and went back to eating. Clara couldn't help a small smile. After lunch, they returned to work. Clara found a particularly heavy box containing law books. She began organizing them on one of the shelves, trying to group them by topic, although she didn't know much about law. The afternoon wore on, and the sun shifted position, casting long shadows across the office floor. Isla, tired of drawing, was now quietly playing with some paper clips, transforming them into small, abstract sculptures. The silence of the office wasn't oppressive as Clara had initially imagined. There was something comfortable about it, something that allowed her thoughts to flow as her hands worked mechanically, without the constant pressure of sewing orders, without the immediate worry about how to pay the rent or buy food. She found herself pondering possibilities she hadn't considered in a long time. Perhaps, and with a stable job, she could finally enroll Isla in a better school. Or maybe she could save up for a technical course for herself. The sound of the door opening interrupted her reverie. Julian walked in, looking tired. His tie was loose, and he carried a thick folder under his arm. His eyes swept across the office, and an expression of genuine surprise replaced the fatigue. "Wow," he said simply. Clara followed his gaze. Indeed, the transformation was remarkable. The boxes that were previously scattered were now organized in a corner, their contents properly categorized. The books filled the shelves, organized by subject and height. The center table was clean, with the most important documents separated into piles identified with small sticky notes. And on the walls, in a strip at Isla's eye level, about 10 colorful drawings were taped up. Houses, people, birds, and what appeared to be an abstract representation of Julian himself, recognizable by the disproportionately blue tie. "You reorganized everything," Julian approached, looking amazed at the shelves. "And you even organized the books by area of law. How did you—" Clara felt her face warm. "I used the internet to look things up. I hope I didn't do anything wrong." Julian shook his head, still impressed. "It's perfect. Better than I could have done alone in a week." He approached the drawings on the wall. "And I see our resident artist has been busy too." Isla, who was playing under the desk, emerged from her hiding spot upon hearing his voice. "Uncle Jules, I drew you at the courthouse." She proudly pointed to one of the drawings. Julian knelt down to examine the artwork more closely. "This is incredible, Isla. You perfectly captured my 'I'm going to win this case' expression." The girl laughed, delighted by his reaction. Clara watched the interaction with a lump in her throat. How long had it been since Isla had an adult male figure who treated her with such consideration? Julian stood up and looked around again, as if seeing the office with new eyes. "Curse, it's so different," he commented. "It's not just the organization. It's as if—" he searched for the right words. "I spend my day solving other people's problems, but here, it feels like everything is breathing easier." Clara didn't know how to respond. There was a sincerity in his tone that seemed almost vulnerable, as if he were sharing a thought he had just realized. "Well, it's just the first day," she finally said, trying to keep the conversation on safe ground. Julian nodded, returning to his professional demeanor. "True. But I'm already seeing that having you both here was an excellent decision." He checked his watch. "It's past 5. You must be tired." Clara began packing Isla's things. "Yes, I think we accomplished a lot for today." "Let me drive you home," Julian offered, grabbing his jacket. "It's getting dark." Clara hesitated, but the thought of facing the crowded bus with an exhausted Isla in her arms made her accept. "Thank you." As Julian locked up the office, Isla held Clara's hand and whispered, though loud enough for him to hear, "Mommy, I think I like working." Julian smiled, but pretended not to hear, giving them a moment of privacy. Clara bent down and adjusted her daughter's sweater. "Me too, sweetie," she admitted softly. "Me too." On the way down in the elevator, a comfortable silence settled between the three of them. It wasn't the tense silence of the day before, but something new, a quietness that carried the start of trust. The elderly doorman waved at them as they passed through the lobby. "Good evening, Dr. Carter. Ladies." Outside, the cool night air greeted them. The first stars appeared in the sky, shy as uncertain visitors. As they walked to Julian's car, Clara looked back at the red brick building that now housed something new in her life. The voiceless office, as she had thought of it during the day, now seemed to vibrate with unspoken possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to hope. It had been almost a month since Clara and Isla had entered Julian Carter's life. The office, once a jumble of boxes and disorganized papers, was now a functional and welcoming space. The walls, previously bare, displayed a growing collection of Isla's drawings, colorful landscapes, stick figures with huge smiles, and what the girl called official portraits of Uncle Jules winning cases. It was a Friday at the end of October. All afternoon, dark clouds had gathered in the sky, promising a storm that seemed hesitant to fall. Clara was finishing organizing the last documents of the case Julian had closed that morning, a child support dispute that he had won, securing dignified living conditions for a single mother to raise her son. The irony had not escaped Clara. It was as if Julian had a special preference for cases involving broken families, children and mothers struggling to survive. He never mentioned it openly, but she had noticed the pattern in the files she had organized in previous weeks. "Mommy, look at the sky," Isla called from the window, perched in her favorite chair. "It looks like it's going to swallow the building." Clara approached and looked at the horizon. Indeed, heavy black clouds were advancing quickly, covering the sky with a dark, threatening mantle. The wind had picked up, making the trees in the square in front of the building sway violently. "We'd better leave before it starts raining hard," Clara commented, beginning to pack Isla's things into the yellow backpack that now had a permanent spot in the corner of the room. At that moment, Julian entered, shaking off a soaked umbrella. His hair and the shoulders of his jacket were damp, and he had that expression of tired satisfaction he always carried after a productive day at the courthouse. "The storm has arrived," he announced, as if he were the official bearer of weather news. "The first drops caught me at the corner, but by the sound of it, it's just getting started." As if to confirm his words, distant thunder rumbled, followed by the sound of rain beginning to fall harder, tapping on the windows like small, impatient fingers. Isla moved closer to her mother, her large eyes fixed on the window where a curtain of water was now streaming down. Another clap of thunder, closer this time, made the girl jump slightly. "I think it's better if we wait a bit before heading out," Julian suggested, hanging his wet jacket on a coat rack near the door. "This rain doesn't seem like it's going to pass anytime soon." Clara hesitated. It was past 6, and their routine was clear. Leave at 5:30, catch the 6 o'clock bus, get home before 7. But the idea of facing that storm with Isla was not at all appealing. "We don't want to bother you," she started, but was interrupted by an intense flash of lightning, followed immediately by deafening thunder that made the entire building vibrate. The lights flickered once and twice, and then the office plunged into darkness. "Mommy!" Isla's voice sounded frightened in the gloom. Clara reached her immediately, scooping her into her arms as her eyes tried to adjust to the sudden lack of light. She felt her daughter's small body trembling against hers. "It's all right, sweetie," she whispered, stroking the girl's hair. "It's just a power outage. It'll be back on soon. I have flashlights and candles in the kitchen cabinet." Julian's voice came from the darkness. "Stay put. I'll go get them." Clara heard his footsteps moving away, careful but steady, as if he knew every inch of the path even without seeing. Isla clung tighter to her mother's neck when another peal of thunder resonated outside. "Don't monsters like the dark, Mommy?" The question came in a whisper, so low that Clara almost didn't hear it. "No, sweetie. Actually, monsters are very afraid of the dark," Clara improvised, her heart tightening. "That's why they never show up when it's truly dark." "Really?" "Absolutely true," Clara confirmed, placing a kiss on her daughter's forehead. "They prefer to hide on nights like this." A small beam of light appeared, illuminating the hallway leading to the kitchen. Julian returned, holding a flashlight and carrying a package of candles. "Those found the emergency kit," he announced, placing the items on the center table. "It's not much, but it'll brighten the place up." With precise movements, he began distributing the candles in strategic spots around the room, lighting them one by one with a lighter he pulled from his pocket. As small flames flickered here and there, the office took on a golden, shimmering light, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Isla watched, fascinated, her eyes reflecting the small lights like enchanted mirrors. The initial fear seemed to give way to a kind of wonderment. It looks like a castle," she commented, releasing her mother's embrace to better explore the new environment. Julian smiled, pleased with the effect. "And every castle needs a feast, doesn't it?" He reached for his cell phone. "How about pizza while we wait for the power to come back on?" Clara started to protest. It was another gesture of generosity that she wouldn't know how to repay. But Isla was already jumping up and down with excitement. "Cheese pizza? Cheese pizza?" Julian looked at Clara as if asking for permission. There was something in his eyes, illuminated by the candlelight, an expression that mixed amusement with something else, something Clara couldn't define, but which made her acquiesce with a small nod. "Great," he quickly typed. "Luckily, the pizza place on the corner works even without power. Gas ovens count, you know. And they have an app that works offline." While they waited for the pizza to arrive, Julian improvised a comfortable spot in the center of the room. He pushed the table away, brought pillows from the sofa in his private office, and spread them out on the floor. "Indoor camping," he announced, sitting on one of the pillows and inviting them to do the same. Clara was still tense, aware of how unusual the situation was, but Isla had already embraced the camp, exploring the shadows cast on the wall by the candle flames. "Have you ever really camped, Uncle Jules?" Isla asked, watching the shadow of her own hand dancing on the wall. "When I was a teenager," Julian replied, adjusting on the pillow. "So my dad used to take me and my brother to the mountains every summer." "You have a brother?" Isla's curiosity was insatiable. In a month, she had transformed from a shy girl into a brave little conversationalist, at least with Julian. "I do. His name is Thomas. He lives in another state, works as an engineer." "Do you fight like I used to fight with Luca at daycare?" Julian laughed. "Sometimes brothers do that, but we also look out for each other." Clara watched the conversation in silence, absorbing small details about Julian that she hadn't known before. In a month of working together, he had always been proper and friendly, but rarely spoke about himself. She realized she knew surprisingly little about the man who had reached out to help them. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Julian stood up, grabbed the flashlight, and went to answer. He returned shortly after carrying 2 pizza boxes that exuded an irresistible aroma. "Dinner is served," he announced, placing the boxes in the center of the camp. They ate right there, sitting on the floor on the pillows, lit only by the candles and the strategically positioned flashlight. The storm continued outside, but inside the office, a strangely cozy atmosphere had settled in. Julian told stories from his college days, of curious cases he had defended, always omitting names and details that could identify his clients. Isla listened with absolute attention, occasionally asking questions that made the 2 adults laugh. Gradually, Clara felt her shoulders relax. There was something about that night out of the ordinary, that improbable moment that seemed to dissolve the layers of caution she had built up over the years. When they finished eating, Julian suggested a game of shadow puppets. With the flashlight and his hands, he began creating figures on the wall: a rabbit, a dog, a butterfly. Isla tried to imitate, giggling when her fingers couldn't quite reproduce the necessary movements. Clara found herself smiling, then laughing, and then participating as well. Her skillful fingers, trained by years of sewing, created delicate and precise shadows that delighted Isla. "Mommy makes the best ones," the girl exclaimed proudly when Clara managed to reproduce a perfect swan. "No doubt about it," Julian agreed, and there was a genuine admiration in his voice that made Clara feel an unexpected warmth in her chest. After a few more rounds, Ayla began to yawn. The excitement of the night, combined with the cozy warmth of the candles and a full stomach, was starting to take its toll. "Do you live alone?" The question came suddenly, in the middle of a yawn, with that direct frankness only children can have. Julian seemed slightly surprised by the change of subject, but answered with his usual honesty, "I do." "Aren't you sad?" Isla insisted, her eyes already half closed with sleep. "Sometimes," Julian admitted after a brief pause. "But I have friends. And now I have you 2 coming here every day, making my office prettier and more organized." Isla smiled, satisfied with the answer, and snuggled into her mother's lap. Within minutes, she was deeply asleep, as only children can be, even in the middle of a storm and in a place that wasn't her bed. Clara adjusted her daughter in her lap, stroking her hair with gentle, rhythmic movements. The silence that settled wasn't uncomfortable. It was a shared quietness, punctuated only by the sound of the rain outside and Isla's peaceful breathing. "She's incredible," Julian commented in a low voice, looking at the sleeping girl. "So smart, so perceptive." "She is," Clara agreed, feeling familiar pride swell in her chest. "Sometimes I think she understands the world better than I do." "Children have that natural wisdom that we lose with age," Julian reflected, adjusting one of the candles that was starting to go out. "They see what is essential." Clara nodded, not knowing exactly how to respond. There was something about that night, that specific moment, that seemed to suspend the normal rules of their professional relationship, as if the candles, the rain, and the darkness created a temporary space where they could just be two people sharing thoughts, without the complexities of the outside world. "The office is so different," Clara commented, after a few moments. "It hardly looks like the same place I found a month ago." "That's true," Julian agreed, looking around at the organized shelves, the labeled files, the colorful drawings on the walls. "But it wasn't just the physical organization that changed." "What do you mean?" "This place only had papers and laws before. Now it has life." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You and Isla brought something that was missing." Clara felt her face heat up and was grateful for the dim lighting that probably concealed her blush. "Well, I think we finished the organization you asked for," she said, trying to return to safer ground. "Charles, you don't need me anymore." Julian's expression changed. There was a sudden seriousness in his eyes that captured all of Clara's attention. "Yes, I do," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "I want you to stay on as my secretary. Contract, salary, stability." Clara felt her heart race. "Secretary? But I don't have the training for that." "I'm a seamstress. I don't know anything about law or do. You learned more about my filing system in 1 month than my last secretary did in a year," Julian interrupted gently. "You are organized, efficient, discreet. And Isla is already part of the official office decor." He smiled, looking at the sleeping girl. "It would be a shame to separate the artist from her gallery." Clara didn't know what to say. The offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was a lifeline. A steady job, officially contracted, would mean health insurance for Isla, the possibility of renting a better apartment, maybe even saving for the future. "You don't have to answer now," Julian added, noticing her hesitation. "Think about it carefully, but know that the offer is serious." Clara looked at her daughter sleeping on her lap, so small, so confident that her mother would solve everything, that there would be food on the table, a roof over their heads, a future. She felt a certainty growing within her. "I accept," she said simply. Julian's smile lit up his face more than any candle could. "Great, we'll prepare the contract on Monday." He paused, as if hesitating to say what came next. "And if everything continues to go well, you should take a course. It will help me even more." "A course?" "For a paralegal assistant. It's quick, practical. With what you've already learned here, it would be almost a formality, and it would open more doors for you." Clara felt something expand inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if an entirely new horizon was opening before her, not just survival, but growth. Not just existing, but advancing, possibility. That's what she felt. The possibility of a different future, of a life that wasn't just a constant struggle against the tide. The rain continued to fall outside, beating against the windows with its uneven music. Inside the office, illuminated by the flickering glow of the candles, 3 people formed an improbable picture. A sleeping child dreaming of shadows on the wall, a man who offered much more than a job, and a woman who, for the first time in years, allowed herself to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. It was a light night, no grand promises, no dramatic declarations, just the simple, comforting presence of each other. And perhaps, Clara thought as she watched the reflection of the flames dancing in Julian's attentive eyes, perhaps that was exactly what they all needed. Julian Carter's small office had transformed in just 2 months. It wasn't just the impeccable organization of the files, the functional arrangement of the furniture, or the reception desk now always ready to greet clients. It was something more subtle, more profound. The office had gained a soul. On a Wednesday morning, Julian arrived earlier than usual. He carried a colorful bag that he placed on Clara's desk with an enigmatic smile. "Good morning," he greeted when she and Isla arrived promptly at 8 o'clock, as they always did. "I have a surprise." Isla's eyes immediately widened. At 4 years old, the word surprise had a magical power, capable of sparking infinite expectations. She approached the desk, curious, while Clara hung their coats on the rack near the door. "What is it, Uncle Jules?" The girl's voice vibrated with anticipation. Julian pretended mystery, looking around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Well, since our official artist is in need of new supplies," he opened the bag and began to take out the items one by one, like a magician pulling rabbits from a hat. First, a case of colored markers, then 2 coloring books with princess and animal themes, and finally, several sheets of sparkly stickers, stars, moons, hearts, and flowers. "All this is for me." Isla could barely believe it, her small fingers hesitantly touching the treasures in front of her. "Of course," Julian confirmed. "Your drawings are making our office look better than any museum painting. Artists need good materials." Clara watched the scene with a mixture of gratitude and discomfort. Every small gesture Julian made toward Isla touched her deeply, but also made her feel indebted. Since she had officially started working as a secretary, with a contract and a fair salary, she insisted on maintaining a clear line between their professional and personal relationship. But Julian, with his natural generosity, often blurred that line. "Julian, you didn't have to," she started, but was interrupted by Isla's explosion of joy, who was already hugging the markers as if they were a precious treasure. "Thank you, Uncle Jules." The girl skipped over to him and hugged his legs tightly. "I'm going to make the most beautiful drawing in the world for you," Julian laughed, crouching down to her height. "I can't wait to see it, but there is one condition." Isla stared at him, suddenly serious. "What is it?" "This notebook here," he pointed to one of the coloring books, which had a small clasp and a plastic key, "is special. It's your artist's diary. In it you can draw whatever you want, things just for you, and no one can look at it without your permission. Not me, not your mom. It's your secret space." The girl's eyes sparkled at the idea of having a space all her own, a place where her thoughts and drawings would be protected. She took the notebook with reverence, tracing her fingers over the cover decorated with silver stars. "My little star notebook," as she murmured, enchanted. Clara felt a lump in her throat. Julian wasn't just giving material gifts. He was offering something much more valuable. Respect for Isla's individuality. Recognition that even at 4 years old, she deserved her own space, her own choices. That morning, while Clara answered phone calls and organized Julian's schedule, Isla transformed her corner of the office into a true art studio. She spread out markers, opened the animal coloring book, and worked with surprising concentration for someone so small. Every so often, she looked up to watch Julian, who was working at his desk reviewing documents, or Clara, who was typing on the computer. Around 11 o'clock, as Julian prepared to leave for a court hearing, Isla approached him with an unexpected question. "Uncle Jules, do you help everyone?" Julian, who was adjusting his tie in front of the small mirror on the wall, turned around, surprised. "What do you mean, Isla?" "You helped us," the girl explained, holding a blue marker. "And you help the people who come here sad and leave happy. Do you help everyone?" Julian smiled, thoughtful. "I try to," he answered simply. "I don't always succeed, but I try." Isla processed the information seriously. Then, with that crystalline logic of children, she asked the question no adult had thought to ask. "And who helps you?" Julian's smile wavered for an instant. Something passed over his eyes, a shadow, a vulnerability that Clara, watching the scene from her desk, had never noticed before. It was only a second, but it revealed layers of the man she had yet to know. "That's a very good question, Isla," he finally replied. I'll think about it while I'm at the courthouse." He left shortly after, taking the girl's innocent and profound question with him. In the afternoon, when Julian returned, he seemed quieter than usual. He won the case, he briefly explained to Clara, but something in his expression suggested his thoughts were far away. After the last client of the day left, when Clara was tidying up her desk to go home and Isla was carefully putting her new markers back into the case, Julian finally broke the silence. You know," he began, sitting in the chair across from Clara's desk. "I've been thinking about Isla's question all day." Clara looked up, waiting for him to continue. "I spent so much time taking care of others that I forgot about myself," he admitted, with an honesty that surprised them both. "My apartment has been empty for years. I barely remember the last time I took a real vacation. My life is this office, the courts, other people's problems." There was a raw vulnerability in his confession, as if the simple question from a 4-year-old had removed a mask he had worn for so long that he'd forgotten it was there. "But you two brought something back." He looked around at the office, now decorated with the colorful drawings, at the markers neatly arranged in the corner of the desk, at the star stickers Isla had carefully placed at strategic points in the space. Clara didn't know what to say. She felt as if she were seeing Julian for the first time, not the competent lawyer, not the generous benefactor, but simply a man who, amidst all his professional success, had lost something of himself. Isla, who had seemingly not been paying attention, suddenly walked over and placed a sheet of paper on the desk, between the two adults. It was a simple drawing, 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, and 1 small, all holding hands, all smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. "That's us," she explained, pointing to each figure. "The office family." Julian looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then, with a smile that seemed to contain both joy and an indefinable sadness, he gently touched Isla's hand. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen," he said, and his voice held an emotion that went far beyond simple words. It was a quiet afternoon in the office. Winter was already announcing itself in the cold gusts that battered against the windows, making them gently vibrate. Clara was organizing some files while Isla, seated at her special little desk in the corner of the room, worked intently in her little star notebook. The girl had developed the habit of drawing daily, creating a colorful record of her impressions of the world. 3 months had passed since Clara officially started working as Julian's secretary. Her life had changed significantly. She could now pay the rent without delays, buy new clothes for Isla without having to choose between that and the month's groceries, and had even begun to save a small amount every month, a modest savings, but one that represented something she hadn't had in years: security. Julian walked into the main room, returning from a meeting with a client. He looked thoughtful, with that expression Clara had learned to recognize. He was analyzing a problem, turning it over and over in his mind, searching for solutions. "Did Mr. Brito leave already?" Clara asked, looking up from the files. "Yes," Julian replied, placing his briefcase on the desk. "Complicated case. Custody dispute. The father wants visitation rights, but disappeared for 4 years." Clara nodded, returning her attention to the papers. Family cases always made her uncomfortable. Touching on sensitive points she preferred not to examine too closely. Julian approached, hesitant. He seemed to want to say something but couldn't find the right words, a rarity for someone so articulate in the courts. "Do you have any other appointments for today?" he finally asked. "No, just Mrs. Oliveira at 4, for that contract review." Julian nodded, then pulled up a chair and sat down next to her desk. There was a seriousness in his expression that made Clara put down her pen and give him her full attention. "Clara, I've been thinking," he began, his voice low so Isla wouldn't hear. "We've been working together for months, but there's one subject you've never touched upon and I've avoided asking." Clara's heart raced. There were several subjects she avoided: her past, her fears, her struggles, but something in his tone indicated a specific topic. "Have you ever thought about asking Isla's father for child support?" The words fell like stones into the calm lake Clara had carefully built around herself. She felt her face heat up, and her hands instinctively sought the edge of the desk, as if she needed to anchor herself to something solid. He disappeared. she replied, her voice harsher than she intended. He never wanted to know. Julian didn't look away, but his expression softened. I understand, and I completely respect your decision not to talk about it. But as a lawyer who works in family law, I feel I must at least mention the fact that he doesn't want to know doesn't eliminate his legal obligations. Clara leaned back in her chair, a mix of emotions crossing her face: discomfort, shame, a touch of anger. It's not that simple, she murmured, glancing quickly at Isla, who was thankfully still absorbed in her drawings. There are complications. There always are, Julian agreed softly, but he has an obligation. I can help you, if you want. Something about the way he said those last three words, if you want, touched Clara deeply. There was no pressure, no judgment, just a sincere offer, with full respect for her autonomy and her choices. I don't know if it's worth it, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Stirring all that up, bringing it to the surface. You don't have to decide now, Julian interrupted gently. Think about it, and know that, regardless of your decision, nothing changes here. Clara nodded, grateful for the space he gave her. Julian stood up and returned to his office, leaving her with her thoughts. That night, after putting Isla to bed, Clara sat on the edge of her daughter's bed for a long time, watching the girl's serene, sleeping face. The conversation with Julian had unearthed memories and feelings she had been avoiding for years. Ricardo Alves was not Isla's biological father, as she had let Julian believe. He was her stepfather, the man who had helped raise the girl since her first months. When he died in the construction accident, Isla was only 2, and for all practical purposes, he was the only father figure she had ever known. It was easier to let people think Ricardo was the biological father than to explain the complicated truth. Isla's real father was Henry Mendoza, a former colleague of Clara's from when she worked as a salesperson in a clothing store. Their relationship had been brief, a few weeks of dating that Clara, young and inexperienced, mistook for love. When she discovered the pregnancy and told Henry, his reaction was clear. He didn't want children, didn't want responsibility, didn't want her. He simply vanished. He changed jobs, changed his number, disappeared. Clara, only 20 at the time, without family support and scared, faced the pregnancy alone. She met Ricardo a few months after Isla's birth, and he embraced both of them as if they were his own family, until the accident took him from them. Clara ran her hand through Isla's golden hair, so similar to Henry's. The girl deserved more. She deserved everything Clara could provide her, including what was rightfully hers. The next morning, she arrived at the office earlier than usual. Julian was already there, reviewing some documents. He looked up when she entered, surprised to see her without Isla. "Good morning," he greeted. "Is everything all right?" "I dropped Isla off at daycare earlier today," Clara explained. "But I needed to talk to you before the day started." Julian nodded and gestured to the chair in front of him. Clara took a deep breath and sat down, her hands slightly trembling. "I thought about what you said, about the child support. And if it's for her, let's do it." Something in Julian's gaze lit up. It wasn't exactly satisfaction, but a kind of respect, as if Clara's courage had confirmed something he already suspected about her. "Great. We'll need some information." "There's something you should know first," Clara interrupted. And then, in a firm but low voice, she told him the truth about Henry, about Ricardo, about the lies of omission she had maintained to protect herself and Isla from shame and difficult questions. Julian listened without interrupting, his face maintaining a neutral and professional expression that Clara silently appreciated. When she finished, he nodded once. "Thomas, thank you for trusting me," he said simply. "This doesn't change anything about the process. He still has legal obligations to Isla." In the following weeks, Julian worked discreetly on the case, using the few details Clara could provide: full name, old workplace, approximate date of birth. He hired a private investigator to locate Henry. The information arrived on a rainy Wednesday. Henry Mendoza, 34, a sales manager at a department store across town, married for 3 years to Patricia Silva Mendoza, father of a 2-year-old boy. Clara received the news with a calmness that surprised even herself. Years ago, the discovery that he had moved on, started a family, would have felt like a stab wound. Now it was just a fact, like the weather or the time of day. "What's the next step?" she asked Julian, her voice firm. "We can try an out-of-court approach first. I'll send a formal letter explaining the situation and proposing an agreement for child support." Clara nodded. "And if he refuses, then we file the lawsuit. There's the paternity test, which the judge will certainly order, and then the definition of the support amount based on his income." Everything happened exactly as Julian predicted. The letter was sent, and the response came 2 weeks later. A furious call from Henry to the office, demanding to speak with Julian. Clara was alone when the phone rang. "Dr. Julian Carter's office," she answered, professional as always. "I want to speak to the lawyer." The male voice on the other end of the line was tense, charged with contained anger. "About this absurd letter I received." Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. Even after almost 5 years, she would recognize that voice anywhere. "One moment, please," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I'll check if he can take your call." With trembling hands, she put the call on hold and went to Julian's office, where he was working on some documents. "It's him," she said simply. "Henry. He's on the phone." Julian stood up immediately, an expression of concern crossing his face. "Do you want to step out? I can handle this alone." Clara shook her head. "No, I'll face this. It's for Isla." She returned to her desk, transferred the call to Julian, and then sat down, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging in her chest. Even with the door closed, she could hear parts of the conversation. Julian's voice, always calm and professional, and occasionally Henry's raised tone. When Julian left his office, about 20 minutes later, his expression was serious. "He doesn't want to acknowledge paternity without a DNA test," Julian informed her. And he made it clear that, even with a positive test, he will fight to pay the absolute minimum. He showed no interest in meeting Isla. Clara nodded, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over her. On one hand, she feared Henry might want parental rights just to disrupt their lives. On the other, it hurt to know that her daughter was so easily discarded by her own father. "So we go to court?" she asked. "Yes, I'll prepare the petition today." The process was faster than Clara expected. The paternity test was conducted, a difficult moment to explain to Isla, who didn't understand why she needed to give a kiss on the little stick, and who that serious man was who looked at her as if she were a stranger. The result, as expected, confirmed Henry as the biological father. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Clara took the day off work, and Julian, obviously, would also be absent. It was the first time the office had been completely closed since she started working there. "Is Isla staying at daycare all day?" Julian asked as he drove to the courthouse. "Yes. I explained we had an important meeting." Julian nodded, his eyes fixed on the road. "How are you feeling?" Clara looked out the window, watching the city pass by. Strange, ashamed, angry, but mostly determined. Ashamed why? She hesitated. For having to expose all of this, for Isla having to know someday that her father didn't want her. For Clara, Julian interrupted gently, "There is nothing shameful about seeking what is rightfully your daughter's. The only person who should feel shame in this story is not you." Those words stayed with her throughout the hearing. Sitting next to Julian, watching Henry across the room with his lawyer, Clara held her head high. When the judge asked if she would like to speak, Clara stood up, her legs slightly trembling. "I am not here for revenge or for money for myself," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "It's not for me. It's for what is fair for her. My daughter deserves the support of both parents, even if one of them doesn't want to participate in her life." The judge listened attentively, and after all the considerations and calculations, delivered his decision. Monthly support fixed at a fair amount, based on Henry's income, and retroactive payment covering the past 2 years, the maximum allowed by law. Henry's expression upon hearing the amounts was one of pure indignation, but his lawyer quickly advised him to accept the decision, avoiding appeals that would likely be denied and would only increase costs. Leaving the courthouse, as they walked to the parking lot, Clara felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. She had faced one of her biggest fears and emerged victorious, not for herself but for Isla. "We won," Julian commented, opening the car door for her. "Yes," she agreed, but there was no jubilation in her voice, only a new serenity. "When do the payments start?" "The first one should be made within 15 days. I will monitor it to ensure he complies rigorously." 2 weeks later, Julian called Clara into his office. On the table, an official envelope and some documents organized in a folder. "The first payment has arrived," he announced, handing her the papers. "Everything is in order. I opened a savings account in Isla's name, where the amounts will be deposited monthly. You will have access as the legal guardian, but the money is hers for her future." Clara held the paper, feeling its weight, not just physical but symbolic. It represented not just financial resources, but the legal recognition of something she had always known. Isla deserved everything the world could offer. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "As for doing this with respect, without pity, with truth." Julian smiled, that genuine smile he rarely showed his clients, but which Clara and Isla saw often. "It's my job." "No," she disagreed softly. "Your job would be to represent my interests in court. What you did was much more. You gave me the courage to face this." At that moment, Isla entered the room, returning from the restroom. Her curious eyes immediately noticed the papers in her mother's hand. "What is that, Mommy?" Clara exchanged a look with Julian before answering. "It's an important paper, sweetie. Something good for your future." The girl seemed satisfied with the vague answer. She walked up to Julian and, without warning, hugged his legs, her characteristic way of showing affection. "Are you going to be everyone's lawyer now?" she asked, looking up with that solemn expression she sometimes adopted, looking much older than her 4 years. Julian laughed, surprised by the question. "What do you mean, Isla?" "You helped Mommy. You help the people who come here sad. I think you should help everyone." There was a profound simplicity in the girl's logic, an elemental truth that made both Clara and Julian smile. "I can't help the whole world, little one," Julian replied, crouching down to her height. "But I promise to try to help as many people as I can." Clara watched the two of them, feeling a wave of gratitude so intense it almost overwhelmed her. Her life had completely changed in just a few months, not just financially, but emotionally. Where before there was only struggle and survival, now there were possibilities, support, perhaps even hope. "I know," Isla suddenly exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with an idea. "I'm going to draw you as a superhero with a cape and everything." Before Julian could respond, the girl was already running back to her special corner, eager to materialize her new artistic vision. Clara and Julian exchanged a look and laughed together. A light, shared laugh that seemed to clear the air of all the tension of the past few weeks. That subject Clara never spoke about had finally been confronted, and she had emerged stronger on the other side. The afternoon sun streamed through the office windows, creating golden patterns on the floor. In her corner, Isla was already scribbling intently, occasionally looking up to study Julian, capturing details for her super lawyer portrait. Clara put the documents in her bag, feeling that, for the first time in many years, the future was not just something to be feared, but something to be built. It was a Tuesday morning like any other at the office. Autumn was beginning to show signs, with golden leaves occasionally dancing past the window, carried by a cooler breeze. Clara was organizing some folders in the file, putting recently concluded cases in order, including Isla's child support case, now duly documented and secured, not just on paper, but in the stability it provided. 3 months had passed since the hearing. The child support deposits arrived punctually, a financial stability that Clara had never imagined having. Added to her secretary's salary, which Julian had increased after she completed the first module of her paralegal course, it allowed for a different life, not one of luxury, but of security. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the office. Clara had prepared 2 cups, as she did every morning. One for herself with milk and a little sugar, and one for Julian, black and strong. simple gestures that had become part of a pleasant routine, something she appreciated more than she could express. She took the cup intended for Julian and walked to his office, knocking softly on the half-open door. He was focused on some documents, his brow slightly furrowed as he read a complex contract. "Your coffee," Clara announced, entering after his nod. "Right on time," Julian smiled, pushing the papers away. "How do you always know when I'm in need of caffeine?" "Years of observing human behavior," she joked, placing the cup on the desk. This ease for small jokes was new. The Clara from 8 months ago, tense and always on the defensive, seemed like a completely different person now. Instead of leaving immediately as she normally would, she remained standing near the desk. There was a different gleam in her eye, a calm determination that Julian quickly noticed. "Did something happen?" he asked, sitting up straight in his chair. Clara nodded, a small smile at the corner of her lips. "I made an important decision last night." Julian gestured for her to sit down, giving her his full attention. Clara settled into the chair across the desk, her hands resting calmly in her lap, another sign of the confidence that had grown within her. "With this steady job," she began, and there was a contained pride in her voice, "I'm enrolling Isla in school, with lunch, uniform, and everything sorted." The words were simple, but carried the weight of an enormous accomplishment. It wasn't just about formal education. It was about normalcy, about providing her daughter with the same opportunities other children had, about leaving behind the life of deprivation. Julian smiled broadly, his eyes reflecting genuine satisfaction. "She's going to love it," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "She's a smart girl." Something in those words, the recognition of Isla's potential, the faith in the girl's abilities, touched Clara deeply. So many times, when struggling alone, she had feared that the hardships would limit her daughter's chances in the future. Hearing someone affirm what she had always known, that Isla was bright, capable, special, was like a confirmation that they were on the right path. "Thank you," she said, with a calm gaze that held more emotion than any exaggerated expression could convey. "For the stability, for listening, for the chance." It was the first time Clara had thanked him so directly, so comprehensively. Not for small gestures or sporadic kindnesses, but for the complete meaning of what those months had represented in her life. Julian seemed momentarily speechless, touched by her sincerity. "You deserved every bit of this, Clara. Your work here has been impeccable." "Even so," she insisted softly, "many wouldn't have given me the initial chance. You looked beyond the circumstances." A moment of comfortable silence settled between them. Julian took a sip of coffee, as if he needed that instant to process the conversation. "Have you chosen the school?" he finally asked. "Rainbow Institute," Clara replied, brightening at the practical topic. "It has a great reputation. It's 15 minutes from home, and most importantly, when we visited, Isla fell in love with the place." "When does she start?" "Next month. I've already saved up for the enrollment and initial materials. And with the child support, I can easily manage the monthly tuition." The phone at the reception desk rang, interrupting the conversation. Clara stood up, returning to work, while Julian remained seated for a few moments, watching the door through which she had left, a reflective smile on his face. The following weeks proceeded at a steady, pleasant pace. The office maintained its routine, clients coming and going, deadlines being met, files being organized. But now there was something new in the air, the anticipation of Isla's first day of school. Clara and the girls spent an entire Saturday buying school supplies, new notebooks, colored pencils, markers, backpack, pencil case. And the most important item of all, the lunchbox. Isla chose a purple one, decorated with silver stars, which reminded her of the special notebook Julian had given her months ago. The uniform, white shirt with the school logo, navy blue skirt, white socks, and black shoes, was purchased with the same care. Clara had spent the night before the first day of school meticulously ironing each piece, while Isla, too excited to sleep, stayed by her side asking endless questions about what school would be like. On the morning of the big day, Clara woke up even before the alarm clock rang. She prepared a special breakfast, pancakes with honey, Isla's favorite, and packed the lunchbox with a cheese sandwich, sliced apple, homemade cookies, and a small chocolate bar as a special surprise. "Mommy, what if the other children don't like me?" Isla asked as Clara adjusted the ribbon in her hair. "It's impossible not to like you, sweetie," Clara smiled, adjusting the collar of the white shirt. "Just be yourself, the way you are here in the office. Remember how you won over Uncle Jules on the very first day?" Isla smiled, reassured. "I'll draw for them too. Excellent idea." At the school gate, Clara knelt down to her daughter's height, adjusting the backpack one last time on her small back. There was a lump in her throat, not of sadness, but of a mix of pride and that inevitable nostalgia of seeing her little girl growing up. "I remember. I'll pick you up at 12:30 p.m. right here at this gate," she said, holding Isla's little hands. "And then we'll go to the office to see Uncle Jules." "Yes, we will. He's anxious to hear all about your first day." With a final tight hug, Clara watched her little one walk through the colorful gate, the star lunchbox swinging in one hand while the other waved goodbye. For a moment, she stood still, soaking in that image, her daughter in uniform, going to school like any normal child. A triumph so simple and yet so monumental at the same time. The routine was quickly established. Clara would drop Isla off at school in the morning, go to the office, work until noon, pick up her daughter, they would eat lunch together, and then Isla would accompany her to the office in the afternoon, occupying her special corner with homework and drawings. Julian watched this new dynamic with quiet satisfaction. There was something deeply gratifying in seeing how their lives had transformed over the past few months, in knowing that he had contributed, even if partially, to that change. Isla, in turn, blossomed in school. Her stories during lunch and the afternoon were full of new friends, activities, and discoveries. Her vocabulary expanded. Her questions became more complex. Her world opened up in ways that delighted both Clara and Julian. On a Wednesday afternoon, about 2 months after school started, Isla arrived at the office particularly agitated. Her eyes were sparkling with excitement, and she clutched a colorful piece of paper to her chest as if it were a treasure. "Is Uncle Jules in his office?" she asked Clara as soon as they entered. "He is, but he has a client, sweetie. You'll have to wait a little bit." Isla nodded, sitting in her special spot, swinging her legs impatiently, the paper still tightly held in her hands. When the door to Julian's office finally opened and the client left, she jumped out of her chair and ran over, barely waiting for the man to say goodbye. "Uncle Jules," she called, entering the office with the familiarity of someone who knows the space well. Julian looked up from the documents he had just signed, an immediate smile spreading across his face as he saw the girl. "Hello, Miss Isla. How was school today?" "Super special," she exclaimed, approaching the desk. "I have something for you." With a solemn gesture, Isla held out the paper she had been guarding. It was a colorful invitation, decorated with glued paper flowers and glitter that inevitably scattered across Julian's desk. "Invitation," she announced proudly. "Performance at my school. Spring poem. I'm going to speak on the stage." Julian took the invitation with the seriousness the moment demanded, examining it carefully. The event would be on the morning of the following Friday, at 10 a.m., in the school's small auditorium. "My teacher only chose 5 kids to recite poetry," Isla explained, her large eyes fixed on Julian, anxious for his reaction. "I'm going to be the spring." Julian looked at the invitation, then at Isla, and finally closed the folder of documents he had been working on. With a firm, decisive voice he replied, "I wouldn't miss it." The smile that lit up Isla's face was worth more than any contract he could have been signing at that moment. The girl gave a small jump of joy, then hugged Julian around the neck before running off to show the invitation to Clara, leaving a trail of glitter behind. Later, when Isla was absorbed in her homework, Clara entered Julian's office to discuss the schedule for the following week. "About Isla's invitation," she began, a little hesitant. "I know you have that important court hearing on Friday. You don't have to feel obliged to go. She will understand." Julian looked at Clara with a serious expression. "I already rescheduled the hearing. I spoke with Judge Mendez personally, explained the situation. He has grandchildren. He understood perfectly." Clara blinked, surprised. "You rescheduled a court hearing?" "Clara," Julian said softly, "there are priorities in life that a court can wait for. A stage debut is not one of them." She didn't know what to say. It was another moment where Julian showed that his commitment to them went beyond professional, beyond expected, beyond necessary. "Thank you," was all she could manage to murmur before leaving. Friday dawned sunny, perfect for a spring celebration. Clara helped Isla get dressed in her special costume, a light green dress with colorful flower appliques, which they had made together in the last few days, leveraging Clara's sewing skills. "Do you think there will be a lot of people?" Isla asked as her mother braided her hair, intertwining small artificial flowers among the golden strands. "There's some parents, teachers, the other classes," Clara replied. "But you shouldn't worry about that. Just concentrate on your poem and imagine you're reciting it just for me and Uncle Jules." The mention of Julian made Isla's eyes sparkle. "He promised he would come, and he will keep his promise," Clara guaranteed, giving the final touches to her daughter's hair. They arrived at the school early. The small auditorium was already being set up, with chairs arranged in rows and a simple stage decorated with panels of flowers and butterflies made by the students. Isla's teacher took her backstage, where the other children participating in the performance were already gathering, leaving Clara to find a seat in the audience. She chose a seat in the third row, saving a spot next to her for Julian. Gradually, the auditorium filled up, fathers, mothers, some grandparents, teachers from other classes. Clara checked her watch nervously. There were only 10 minutes left before the start of the performance, and Julian still hadn't arrived. When the principal approached the small podium to begin the event, Clara felt her heart tighten. Had something happened? Was he delayed because of traffic or some emergency at the office? That's when the side door of the auditorium opened, and Julian entered discreetly. He wore not his usual formal suit, but a simple brown blazer over a light blue shirt, no tie. And in his blazer pocket, a small yellow flower, a dandelion, probably picked on the way. His eyes quickly found Clara in the crowd, and he walked towards her, silently apologizing to the other parents as he passed through the row. "I thought you wouldn't make it in time," Clara whispered when he sat down next to her. "Not even the worst traffic jam in the city could make me miss this," he replied, adjusting himself in the small school chair, clearly made for shorter adults. The performance began with a song sung by the whole class, followed by small recitations about the seasons. When it was spring's turn, Isla walked onto the stage with small but determined steps, positioning herself in the center. For a moment, she seemed paralyzed upon seeing the audience, her eyes anxiously scanning the faces. Then, she found Clara and Julian in the third row. A relieved smile illuminated her face, and she took a deep breath before beginning to recite, her small but clear voice echoing through the auditorium. "Springtime has arrived, bringing flowers and color. The sun shines brighter. The world fills up with love." Her recitation was perfect, without hesitation, accompanied by small, rehearsed gestures. When she finished, there was a 1-second pause before the applause began, a moment when everyone seemed to absorb the sweetness of that child, speaking about renewal and hope. Clara clapped with pride, tears in her eyes. Beside her, Julian applauded with equal enthusiasm, a wide smile on his face. When Isla took a final bow before leaving the stage, she looked directly at them, her eyes shining with joy. After the performance, while waiting for Isla to come out from backstage, Julian looked thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, noticing his distant expression. "About how new this is for me," he answered honestly. "I've never been to a school performance before, not as a student, my parents were always too busy, and certainly never as a child's special guest." There was a vulnerability in his confession that touched Clara deeply. Before she could respond, Isla came running towards them, still in her spring costume, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Did you see? I said everything right." "Yes, we did," Clara smiled, kneeling down to hug her. "You were incredible, my love." Isla turned to Julian, studying him with that intensity that sometimes appeared in her gaze, as if she was trying to decipher something important. "It's your first time at a school theater, right?" she asked, surprising both Clara and Julian with her perception. Julian knelt down to her height, adjusting the wilting dandelion in his pocket. "It is." "How did you guess?" Isla shrugged, with that inexplicable wisdom of children. "Your eyes look different." Like when we get a surprise gift. Julian smiled, touched by the observation. You're right, it was a gift for me to be here today. Then you're going to keep this forever, Isla stated, not as a question, but as an absolute certainty. I will, Julian replied, his voice softer than usual. I promise. Clara watched the exchange between the two, feeling a lump in her throat. There was something profoundly moving about the way that small school performance had transformed into such a significant moment. As they left the school, Isla between them, holding a hand of each, their voices mingling in an animated conversation about the performance, Clara thought about how life could change in such a short time. A year ago, she was walking miles with Isla in her arms to save money for bus fare. Now her daughter was reciting poetry on a school stage, wearing a dress she had made herself, with not only her mother in the audience, but someone who had chosen to be there, who had rescheduled important appointments to witness that small moment. And Julian walked beside them, the wilting flower still in his pocket, his face illuminated by Isla's animated stories, holding on to every detail, every feeling, every emotion. Because now, he had something to keep. A memory not just of a successful case or a victory in court, but of a genuine human connection. A memory not of documents and hearings, but of a 4-year-old girl in a green dress, reciting a poem about hope and renewal. The lunchbox routine had brought much more than just financial stability or formal education. It had brought new meanings, new possibilities, new ways of seeing the world, for all of them. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.